Well. King George or George King? In your own words, who is George?
So I'm an extreme athlete. I specialize in climbing buildings and jumping off them. My most notable ascent was the Shard in 2019, and of which I served a 6-month prison sentence for doing. And yes, since then, I have traveled the globe trying to conquer as many urban heights as I possibly can. And I do not see myself stopping. There is a big list of buildings which where when I tick off one, another one pops up. So there's always been an Everest created somewhere. So I'm on this never-ending journey of trying to conquer as many urban heights as I can.
Well, I'm thinking the Burj Al Arab must be on your list somewhere.
Yeah, legally would be the best sorts of.
Yeah,
Correct.
there are different judicial systems out there,
Yeah.
right? We're going to probably get into that, but George, I got in touch with you after I heard your intervention in a hub dot this community, and I was fascinated about what you've been doing. I checked out your films, and I even though I've, let's say, flown airplanes. I mean, I've actually piloted airplanes without real pilot but license, but I have this terrible fear of heights, and watching a video of you climbing, I my hands get sweaty. So let's just unfurl the this big package, which is this shard, which obviously put you on the map. Age 19, 310 meters. You climbed the shard. What was it that sparked? What was the most important thing for you about doing that climb?
Yeah, so when I was younger, ever since I could remember really, I was obsessed with the idea of doing something big. So I created a list, and at that time it was the youngest to climb Everest, the youngest to swim the channel, the youngest to do this, the youngest to do that. And I just had to do something of meaning, something big. And upon that time, I was on a school art trip from Oxford to London, and I was in the coach and I saw the shard and I simply just wrote it on the list. I didn't think much of it. I didn't think to look at it or check it or think to climb it or whatever. I just put it down on the list, climb the shard amongst all the other many different things. And it was when I was 18, when I was living in London, that I decided to do the first recce. And I just thought I'd turn up, and I looked at it. I thought, this is absolutely possible. And then that next year was just a whole year of trial and error, preparation, training, working towards that goal. And simply, it was a dream, and I needed to make it a reality. It's hard. It's often a hard question to answer fully, the question of why. But it was just it was a dream, and I just needed to make that a reality.
So I guess you're 18 years old as you're studying, and a couple of the documentaries about you, they show the absolute assiduousness that you use disguises to not be visible on pattern recognition software, and but and you had your roommate. How many other people were ever aware of what you were doing? Did you have to have total secrecy? I mean, your parents?
Yeah, so at that time, I essentially lived a double life from my parents. I kept everything from them, um, mainly in fear that they would. I didn't want them to have anxiety. It was better to tell them afterwards. That way it's done and they know I'm safe. But if I say, look, 6 months from now, I'm going to climb the tallest building in the country, well, that could be 6 months worth of induced anxiety. So I made sure not to tell my parents before. But really, at the time, there was only 3 to 4 people who I told. I wanted to keep it a secret. It was important for me to keep it a secret because I was incredibly paranoid that my dream would be compromised. And if someone tells this person, that person tells that one, you never know who's how far down the line is as someone who is actually connected to the shard, and could they put a restraining order from me entering close proximity. So I was very paranoid about my project getting discovered. So I had 3 people who were helping, and that was it.
Amazing amount of preparation. Presumably, even just in the preparation, you learned a ton. How much of the fulfillment actually happens up until D-Day? In other words, is it only about the thrill, or how is there really actually some deep-seated satisfaction of doing that secret planning and getting it all right ahead of time?
So at that age, I thought the shining glory would be the finish. And I realized afterwards that that was not the case, because the most depressed I've ever been in my life was 1 to 2 weeks after climbing the shard, because that was such a goal I had for since 13 years old. So I was kind of left lost, kind of, there was no direction anymore. Where's the course? And now I've learned as a 24-year-old, it's never the arrival, it's always the journey, it's the process, it's the anticipation, it's the apprehension, it's the planning, the training, the visualization. And then once it's done, there's enjoyment, there's thrill, don't get me wrong, but that thrill only lasts for 2 to 3 days. And then I go planning into the next project. Yeah, so I'm very much in love with the process more than the arrival. The thrill doesn't last for too long.
It reminds me of a conversation I had with a inside center who played for France, 100 caps, and he said the worst day of my life was the whistle blowing on the last match he represented France, and whereas he felt probably that he wasn't able to enjoy that whole process, that journey. It was always about, and like Agassi, he says, when I became number one, but I realized that by itself doesn't bring you fulfillment. And I've had on my show another extreme athlete, Dan Egan, who basically invented in the 70s extreme skiing. So he did the most ridiculous things, including going to Russia and being stuck for something like 40 hours by himself in a crevice where he thought he was going to die. And this notion of risk. So you said you wanted to do something big. You've done something big. Why do you need to do bigger or more?
Well, I bear the question is like, how far can I go? I want to test my limits. I want to see what I'm capable of. It's just I want to see where the potential is. Can I continue to improve? Well, if I can, then why not? And how far can I go? And it's these questions which make me want to continue doing it. But there's also the understanding that where the difficulty increases, also my skill level increases with it. And that's an important point on risk, is that I don't necessarily see myself as a professional base jumper or climber. I see myself as a professional risk evaluator. I evaluate risk for a living. I see its rewards, I see its costs. I see, okay, the reward is higher than the cost. Okay, let's look into the dangers, let's look into the hazards, let's look into all these parts, and then I can make an evaluation. Is it worth doing it? And if it's not, and I need a few more years, then I'll make that decision. If it's simply a no-go based on whatever factors, anything from legal to technicalities, then I won't do it. But yes, risk evaluation is just such a massive part of what I do.
So with Dan in the conversation, he's more or less my age. I mean, I can't remember if he's actually a little older, but as you get older, your abilities change. And there are things like your awareness of your abilities and the ego that also can maybe warp some of your impressions of yourself, for example. And of course, you're 24, so you're still way into your prime. I mean, you've got many years left, so it's not exactly relevant. But how do you know how you'll be at 40, or at 50? Will you say, well, I'll go for 10% less because, I'm older? How do you see yourself adapting according to the evolution of your life?
I guess it's something I'll have to work out at the time. It's hard for me to make an inference now. I hope that I will make the right decisions at that time, but of course, there's always the unforeseen. Um, you touched on ego, and ego is such a ego evaluation is such a big thing for people who do the sorts of things I do, because usually it's the ego which kills. So I've always got to really keep my ego in check, because often that is people's demise, is getting or at least not focusing enough when there's a project which is easier than their threshold, but can also risk their life. So, for instance, climbing a crane is a relatively easy thing for me to do, but there's still the risk of death there. But I'll have the same level of focus climbing a crane as I do climbing a building. And that is often just checking my ego, making sure that I'm aware of that. But yeah, it's hard to see how I'll adapt in 10, 20 years time, but I just hope I'll make the right decisions when I get to it. Yeah.
Mm. I'm just interested to get into your mind as you think through these things, you imagine. And this, but at the same time, you also have this ambition. Clearly, you've been driven by this need. This part of your dream was to do something big. And it's fascinating to look at this cross section between ambition, ego, risk, and fear. And it feels like a very dynamic pot.
Mm.
Because if you don't have any ambition, then bon, what happens? Ego needs to exist. Being egoless is a bad idea. So the opposite isn't necessarily good. And then there's this dynamic between risk and fear. And my observation, George, about our society in general and the parenting as a facet of it, as well as education, is that we're trying to eliminate all risk of failure, of pain, hardship. How is it that you are into diving into risk and possibilities of pain?
Yeah, it's something which it's something which I've had from such a young age. I was um counterphobic. Anything which scared me, I felt compelled to do from a very young age. I was extremely curious about fear and what that feeling was. As a 24-year-old, I now understand neurochemically what fear is and adrenaline and what these kind of hormones are. But when I was 9, 10 years old, I had no understanding of these things. I just knew feeling. And I knew there was a feeling which made me quite sharp if I controlled it. And then if once I was released from that fear, I felt a sort of a euphoria, and I wanted to understand that. And I used to go on long runs, and I asked the question to myself, like, how far can I run without stopping? And then I started exploring pain through that. And and then so I discovered these emotions, and from a young age, I realized that these emotions were not negative, they were positive, they had positive effects on me. And I just continued to go down that road. So for me, it was curiosity for a young age. A lot of people don't have that curiosity, or at least when they feel something uncomfortable, they don't really want to sort of lean into it. But I based off my experiences, is the absolute riches of life live in the outside the comfort zone. And that's where the just the beauty of life is. And it's unfortunate that, yes, like you say, parents feel the need to protect kids and not let them sort of go too far astray. And but the whole beauty of life is just it's far out the comfort zone all the time.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, there's this death thing, which is probably way out of everybody's comfort zone, and everything kind of leads is in a diluted version of that fear of death. It's
Mhm.
fear of failure, fear of ridicule, and or fear of pain. These are all sort of micro or smaller versions thereof, and so we live in this society where, as I like to say, and I told you about this before we got on air, which is adventure without risk is not an adventure. And importantly, a life without adventure is not a life. But we've got this sort of society which is swearing us off, whether it's because of insurance or because we only have one kid as opposed to 10 in the old days, and we were trying to avoid any infraction or any problem. I think Brave New World from Aldous Huxley speaks volumes to the type of society we've created. And if you don't have the experience of going through that pain, like you say, the everlasting run, or the doubts that you faced when you're at the top of that building, at a shard, anyway, the way you describe it, there was this moment that was just huge, and you had to go, you had to traverse it. If you don't have that experience, then you're not going to develop the resilience. And so, what do you say? I mean, you're obviously not, presumably, wanting to encourage everyone to go climb the shard. I mean, others have followed you since, but and what do you say to them, by the way?
Well, it's anyone who's done similar things to me is totally their decision. I could imagine that um, they've they've been doing maybe if they've been doing extreme things their life, and maybe my certain directions inspired them to go down that direction. But I can't imagine I would inspire someone on the street to suddenly decide I'm going to climb a building. It's something inside of you. It's something very deep rooted inside of you to do extreme, sort of cutting edge extreme sports where your life might, where your life is at risk. So I don't think people copy me, is what I'm saying. I don't think people who climb buildings have seen what I do and copy me. I think it's something they've already done or done something similar, and then maybe they've gone down a similar sort of direction as me. Because before me, there was Alain Robert, the French Spider-Man, and he's 55, 60, and he's been obviously way longer than I've been alive. But I will never say I'm inspired by him. I never did the things because of him. I just went down a path which I ended up climbing buildings. So if someone is a bit younger or same age or whatever, I wouldn't say they're copying me. I think they're on their own path as well. But yeah, to your other point, yes, I don't aim to inspire people to take risks which could end their life. I think my point is establishing a passion, a gift, some kind of passion, and then taking that passion outside your comfort zone. And then outside your comfort zone, you start to see it sort of formulate into a purpose. And then the rest is history. It's just finding that passion and taking it somewhere very deep and very dark and seeing what comes of it.
This notion of accepting the darkness is quite powerful. If you look around your peers, certainly I have children your age, it's it's rare to see people who embark on challenging their fears and risking everything. To what extent do you feel like there should be more risk allowed in our society?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Totally. I think it should be. I think there should be a whole change in mindset on the perception of risk, because, like I say, the riches of life are outside your comfort zone. And I mean, what's the worst can happen, which can happen, really? You know, like for as long as it's a logical decision to make the risk, and your life isn't on the line, and you just want to take a risk starting a business or take a risk in making a decision, there's what's the worst which can happen? I think a lot of people get um restricted by the apprehension of the unknown, and the fear of the unknown. But I feel if you were to lean into that unknown, you're bound to find something out about yourself or the situation.
It feels like we're much more driven by the fear of missing out.
Oh yeah, 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 totally. It's a big one. Yeah. FOMO, yeah.
Well, so the challenge is the FOMO is driven by what others are doing.
Mm,
But what you're talking about is trying to find what I want to do.
mm. Yeah, and that comes from within. That everyone's got a path, I believe. Everyone's got some kind of gift. I think their mission is to identify that gift, turn it into their passion, and then make it into a purpose. It's every person I met in my life, I've analyzed, or at least sort of got a perception that there is some kind of strength there. And I guess people sort of sometimes they're not open to that, or like you say, they fear of missing out. They want to be accepted, so they stick with the group. That seems like the safer option, to be with the group. But if more people were to see their strengths and to triple down on them, I think yeah, I think the world would be a different place, I think.
Mm. One of the I mean, there are many things that struck me about your journey so far, but one of the sentences, which I also has talked about with Dan, who was obviously on some kind of a similar track with you, which is getting into flow and submitting to the process. It's a very sexy type of idea. And I have had moments of tasting that type of flow. I was an athlete. I tried to, and I still am. And that excitement where you just sort of see things faster. Like when you hit a tennis ball, instead of the size of a tennis ball just being in your hand, it feels like you're hitting a basketball. It's so obvious and you see the little dimensions of it. Whereas for others, it's sort of like a whir, and it's a miracle it ever goes over the net. So submitting to the process and getting into flow, how important is that for you on a daily basis?
Oh, on a daily basis is fundamentally important, because what the flow state is for me. And by the way, flow state, doing things which risk your life is an immediate flow state, because you're forced to. If you do not focus in that one particular moment, you have the potential to die. But I also believe in certain situations, like right now, there is an element of flow, because I'm just sort of going as it is, and I having these states where essentially I am very present in the moment, and there is no yesterday, there's no tomorrow, it's just now. To have those moments during the day is so important for me, because I think that's the very essence of what a human being is, when they strip away all the insecurities, all the vulnerabilities, you just strip it back to something very pure, the now, the moment. And to have those moments during the day is just, it's so important. Otherwise my mind will just wander off into all kinds of different insecurities, and what maybe this person could judge me like that, and what would I do, and that my mind will just go in all sorts of places. But to have moments of flow, if it's writing, or it's speaking to someone on the phone, or it's running, or it's climbing, or it's jumping, or it's packing the parachute, to have those moments during the day is just, I need it. I have to have it.
It seems that we as a society are doing everything to deconstruct the past and are so worried about the future, we're never present. For your colleagues, your people, your peers, rather, that's what I wanted to get to. Do you have conversations that sort of roll into, hey, listen, dude, stop worrying about the future? Or how do you get people to embrace risk without necessarily having to go for, or even find their passion? At your age, what is it? If someone says to you, hey, listen, I don't have any passion, I don't know what it is, how do you unlock it?
Yeah, I think you need to spend a lot of time alone. I think a lot of reasons why people don't find their passion is because they're with people a lot and people judge them and they sort of conform to other groups. But often when people simply ask me, like, how do I find my passion? I always say, if you have the time and you have the money, go travel around Europe or go to some place for 1 month or 2 months alone, no one with you, totally alone, and just think about it and work it out, and it will come because everyone has something they like, that everyone has something they love, everyone has a gift, and everyone knows what those things are. But they are often, I think, swayed by other people. I think peer pressure is such a big influence on people's decisions in life. And I think a lot of the times, I'm a very extroverted person, but I force myself in isolation a lot of the times to work a few things out. And it's proven very, I mean, it's proven hard, but beneficial for me a lot of the times.
So I want to get a little bit more into what's going to be happening for you in the future, but let's just go back to your experience in prison. There's some part of me says this is a morbid question, but being imprisoned, where your liberty, your freedom is completely taken away from you, you're surrounded by people who are, convicted criminals. That's why they're there. What was that like the first day, the first moments you walked in?
Yeah, so it was pretty terrifying. I mean, sensory overload. I am able to control my mind in high pressured situations. But in this situation, there's so much unwritten rules within prison and body language and actual words, which you only learn to develop having spent time within those environments. So going in for the first time, you don't know, there's no one sort of holding your hand saying this is how you do this, is how where you go for that. You just got to work it out, and whilst you're trying to work it out, there's murderers there, there's stabbings there, there's drug, it's just chaos, and you sort of put into the world, the jungle, and you got to work it out. And part of, yes, it was sensory overload and terrifying, but at the same time, I part of me enjoyed it. I enjoyed the chaos of it all. The chaos was just, it was, I loved it in a certain sense. Because I mean, like, it's hard to explain really, but it's just, I felt like I was just in the epicenter of some kind of chaotic. There was some kind of something about the chaos of it, which I kind of I craved with curiosity. It was just curiosity, and I guess in those certain ways, I did like it, but at the same time, there was a lot of fear on that first day, and I didn't sleep the whole night for sure.
Hmm. I've written a book and done a film about prisoners of war of the Japanese, and there you're in a different judicial system. You're unable to understand the language because it's Japanese. Of course, there's a different vocabulary, which I understand was in the prison. And the idea which I'm hearing from you is that there's a novelty, a thrill of discovering this danger, because that, at some level, it felt dangerous. And you had, as you said in some of your interviews, you experienced or you saw people killing themselves and or being stabbed. And so there was some legitimate danger. And I have to imagine that there was also a feeling that, well, I did trespass. I deserve.
Yeah, well, no, I didn't feel like I necessarily deserved to go to prison, but I didn't. I was never feeling sorry for myself because I actually made the prediction before Climb the Shard that I could go to prison for 6 months. I remember saying it to my friend, and that's because there's an injunction on the building, which means that you're contempt of court by climbing the building. So I was aware of these things. So it was never a moment of um feeling sorry, oh look at poor me, feeling sorry for myself. Like I knew what I was getting myself into, and I was totally willing to accept this as a consequence. So I was accepting of it. Yeah.
And I think it goes back to this notion of planning your experience,
Hmm.
as in you're aware of the risks, you're aware of the fear that's going to come with it, and that sort of preparation sort of helped you. What do you think of the idea that we're going to eliminate contact from rugby?
Oh, I think it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's like it's basically taking the most primal and primal part of rugby out of rugby, and it's yeah. What are they going to do the next? Take contact out of boxing? It's ridiculous. Like, you know.
And you did a few series in a documentary with Channel 4, fascinating experiences, because you seem to explore other universes, like what it was, drag racing or car or midnight in Bristol and stuff like that. Um, what are you doing now, and how are you earning your keep? Because climbing buildings is not a salaried type of business.
No, it most certainly isn't. So public speaking is one of my main sources of income. So I do talks to corporate companies and other sorts of companies where I have fear as the main concept, how to control it, how to utilize it to your advantage with the background of my story. And I'm also currently writing a book on fear, which I am not sure when it will be released, but I could imagine early next year. So yeah, the public speaking earns a bit, and the media engagement earn a bit as well. And it's just a matter of trying to connect these dots. Sometimes, yeah. So sometimes for certain projects, I will get a sponsor for certain building climbs. Um, but yes, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult getting a sponsor on board based off the nature of what I do.
Yeah, I'm sure there are not too many Red Bulls out there.
No, there's not, and yeah, see, so even the big companies like Red Bull, which are sort of notorious for extreme sports, they often don't want to push it too far, and they consider me pushing it too far. Whereas I recently had a sponsor called Riot, who are a vaping company, who considered, did funded a project, and then I had a teeth whitening company couple years back, then a CBD company 3 years ago. So there's companies out there, but it's not, yeah, it's not easy, no.
It's not going to be insurance companies.
No.
So, George, you are 24, living in England, and got a speaking career. At the same time, I'm sure that you're thinking, what's next? And I'm not asking you to reveal any scoops about what your next project is, unless you feel like, and that's what it's appropriate. But what, how do you establish the next big thing? Does it have to be 312 meters? In other words,
It, it,
one
it, it
bigger?
it doesn't. I think for me, a big part of it is the creativity behind it. I want to find projects and stunts which have never been done before. That's a big part of it. So I've got this list of very creative stunts which I want to do in urban areas. I don't want to go fully too much in detail, but I want to, yes, sort of transmit creativity into the stunts. Essentially what I want to do is be a pioneer. That's exciting to me. If I'm working towards a building and then someone goes and climbs that building, the how special that building now is to me has gone down because someone else has climbed it. So I want to find these hidden gems around the world, and some of them are very high and up in the clouds, and some are not. Some are sort of a mysterious looking bridge with a train going past it in the middle of nowhere in nature, and something about the scenery and how it can be filmed, and how potentially I could jump off the train with a parachute because there's a land.
Mm,
There's these kind of sequences which, like, it's endless with what can be done. And I have a big list. Well, 12, there's 12 main ones on that list. And then I have another list where there's lots of others. And I will just, based off logistics, I will just try and tick off the ones at the right given time. And yeah, and just try and be as safe as I can in the process.
mm. And so you have this list, let's say there's 12. Is it just a straight list, or is it a list that has three boxes to the side? Element of danger, how illegal it is, and consequences of how long jail. I mean, I'm just wondering what else goes into the evaluation of that 12.
So actually, with the list, I have 12, and they're just the names of them. And then
Mhm.
on other documents, I will have, okay, the title of the particular structure, and then a whole page on the sort of evaluation of it. Some I haven't even written a document on. Others I've gone to extreme lengths with calculations, numbers, how far can my parachute fly based off different wind speeds, a crosswind, a headwind, a tailwind, what could be my contingency landing areas, which one's my main landing area, what height can I, so some have got this whole, grid, lots of different things going on. And then others are just get this in one line. And and then I kind of just maybe come back to it a year from now or whatever. But yeah, we'll just have to go with the flow in terms of that.
Does is climbing the single common factor, and would you consider climbing the Himalayas, or whatever, some rock climbing? What are the things that go into this 12 that you said being the first and being a pioneer, but what is the scope? I mean, is it the first person to ever fight 16 people in a ring, or whatever? I don't know, whatever that could be, or does it have to be related to climbing in your mind?
It doesn't have to be related to climbing. Um, Something which is I like the idea of urban areas as my environment. Um, it's it's a whole different world compared to climbing in nature. There's a whole sort of factor to surveillance and trying to not get caught, or at least getting caught and trying to mitigate legal reasons. There's a whole thing with urban areas which just I've always been attracted to. So it's stunts in urban areas, and that doesn't have to be climbing. It can be whatever my mind feels is right. One of my great I wouldn't say I'm inspired by many people, but Philip Petit is an inspiration. He is the man who walked between the Twin Towers with a tightrope. And although I'm not a tightrope walker, there's something just very magical and artistic about what he did. And I like that sort of thing.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be the highest building. It can be something creative and artistic as well. And I think, yes, creativity is the perfect crime.
I like it.
Mm.
So I want to spend the last piece just talking about fear and factoring in dealing with it. Let's say for Mr. Joe Minter I've used virtual reality and seen myself at the top of a building walking across a little strip, which is absolutely fictive. It's just in my VR, and I still sweat.
Mm.
Um, is that a well? How do you approach fear? How do you help people like me who are scared of heights? How do you help people who are having corporate lives deal with this type of fear? I mean, it's the average Joe, and their fear? What should we be doing?
There's many different methods to utilizing fear. I think one of the main ways which people can feel comfortable when approached with something which is fearful is exposure. Like I said at the beginning, must train fear like a muscle. You have to condition it. So, for instance, I didn't just turn up and climb the shard. I climbed a tree, and then I climbed a higher tree, and then I climbed up a roof, and I climbed up this. Is this idea of incremental progression, which enables people to come comfortable with the fear. Otherwise, they get sensory overload. So let's say someone is fearful of heights, then there is no point in taking them to the top floor. You must take them to the first floor, then the fifth, and then the sixth. And if they can't even get to the first floor, let's show them a photo of what it looks like in the first floor so that they're just a bit mentally disconnected from it. And then let's kind of transmit them a bit further. So that's a big part of it, is this idea of exposure. Another part of it is mindset. So people need to start perceiving fear as a positive force to be embraced and not a negative force to be repressed. This idea that fear is like fire. It can cook your food or it can burn your house down. Depends on how you use it. A lot of people need to start seeing fear as this superpower, this feeling which can empower me to execute and be more concentrated and be in that flow state. So a big part of it is the perception of fear as well. And then also biology. One way to instantly control your cortisol levels, your sort of innate fear is by understanding that breathing and the heart rate are very much interlinked, and they're very much interlinked to fear. So when someone is fearful, their heart is through the roof. But if you want to bring that heart rate down and you want to repress hormones such as cortisol, you can implement breathing techniques. Certain breathing techniques I have used my whole life, and they certainly work. So yes, combining those elements, biology, the mindset, the exposure, you can sort of combine them, and it can absolutely help not only bring the level of fear down, but to begin to start controlling it and using it as a positive force.
What about meditation? Do you practice meditation, mindfulness? Is that something you need to do, wish to propagate?
Yeah, so you sort of a visualization based meditation is absolutely something which I do, and it's not as much. It's not like I sit on the floor with crossed legs and sort of vision it, but it's like
Mm.
it's kind of exactly. it, yeah, it's kind of it's I pace up and down. I feel movement sort of matches the frequency of my thoughts. So for me, what works, and everything works differently for everyone, and that's totally up to the person. But for me, what works is pacing up and down my bedroom. If I pace up and down my bedroom, and I feel the thoughts come in, I visualize, I see what I need to do the next day with what and this and that, and it just works. Other people find different means. Ice baths are good because it's a force, you're forced into that state. And it's sort of long duration exercise, like a long run as well, that really puts me in that meditative state. So yes, I do meditation, but it's often combined with movement or some kind of action.
Mm. In the work on fear, I wonder about two things. To what extent there's a link between the fear that you have, maybe for me, my fear of heights, and something in my past. Is there necessarily, or is it likely that there's a link between this sort of metaphysical fear that I have that dominates me, it even makes me worried about watching you on a film, that is linked to my past? And is it related to something that's darker within me? What would you say to that?
100%. Yeah. So It's very interesting, actually. I read a few studies stating that if someone has innate fear of, let's say, spiders, there is a possible chance that one of them, their ancestors, got bitten by a spider, and the trauma has still remained in the DNA and been passed on to this length. And so, therefore, they have this innate fear of spiders. Another thing is, as you say, maybe trauma from your past. And this can often occur in all sorts of ways. But one way, for instance, is with heights. And this is not a personal story, but my friend told me this story about someone he met who was in fear of heights and they couldn't go 2 steps up a ladder. And part of their fear, as he was spoken to, was that when he was younger, he had a traumatic episode where, well, traumatic vision where he saw a construction site fall down, the scaffolding fall down. And he wasn't really scared of heights. He was scared of whatever the structure he was on falling down. So once he was shown that the structure was strong, he was able to climb up the ladder. So that bears the question is not only sort of let's say, overcoming or controlling a fear, but asking really what is that fear? Is that fear scared of the height, the void, or is it the structure? And a lot of people, you know, have these fears, but you kind of got to, in order to unravel it, you kind of do have to go and sort of look deeper and to see what that root cause is, and then starting to really tackle that root cause. Um, yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I try and focus myself mainly in fear in relation to performance and emotional management. Um, but there's also a whole different thing to be said about psychotherapy, which I'm not actually qualified for, which kind of looks into trauma and certain phobias, which I can have a go at, but it's not like I think that those kind of positions should be reserved for psychologists who are, you know, can really unravel them. But yeah, there's a lot to be said about really trying to understand what the root cause of fear is.
One of the things that I observe and certainly have seen around me is the fear of letting go. And most commonly, that conversation happens around the story of psychedelic drugs, and where people say, "I don't want to do it because I don't know what's behind what happens." Have you ever tried encountered that? What's your story? And is there something that you fear letting go of?
So yeah, absolutely consider myself a psychonaut. I've experimented with LSD, shrooms, all those kind of things, and as a not in a recreational sense, but initially a sense of curiosity, and then I started to see with these certain substances how it can really it can reveal certain things you don't want yourself to reveal yourself to. You become very honest, and yes, there's always an argument to say it's like you can't. It's there's a way to use these kind of substances. It's not a recreational thing. Absolutely a means to a positive end if used properly. Um, and yeah, they certainly have helped clear the cobwebs in certain times of my life, but it's not something I do regularly. And in terms of letting go, um, yes, yeah, there is insecurities, I'm sure, which I have, which I try to let go of. Yeah, easier said than done, and I work on them for sure. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are ones for sure. Yeah.
That is the journey, George, in my mind. That is the journey, figuring out your demons, figuring out the unsaid, the uncovered, figuring out who you are. George, it's been an absolute pleasure. I would almost say thrill to be able to talk to you, to be you know, so close to somebody who's done such shit like this. I mean, so many amazing adventures, and you're on a tremendous path. You can't say you're my youngest person on my podcast. I've actually had a 19-year-old, but you're certainly amongst the youngest, and you bloody hell are the first extreme climber that I've ever had, and it's been a pleasure. How can anybody track you down, follow you? What are the links you'd like to send to? Anything you'd like to plug, George?
Yeah, Shard Climber on Instagram is my handle, and I am receivable to any messages or requests. And yeah, that's where you can find me. And yeah, George King on YouTube. And yeah, from there, and
Do you
I'm
have an
very
agent yet? Do you have an
agent.
agent?
No, I don't. No.
Got to get you one. Hey,
Yeah.
agents out there, you need to recruit George King for
Yes.
speaking.
Yes, I would be certainly open to that. And yes, any requests for public speaking engagements, I would be open to discussing that for sure.
Beautiful, George. Many, many thanks. Keep on going, sir.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.